Hello and welcome to the Conversation Coffee Break with your host Nadine Matheson. As always, I hope that you're well and I hope that you're enjoying your week. I'm enjoying my week. The sun is out. It's hot. I'm feeling so much better and it's just glorious to be out there and just living life. And also, I've been conducting a bit of market research, getting a bit of listener feedback about this new segment of the Conversation podcast called Coffee Break. And the listener feedback has been good. You are enjoying these Coffee Break episodes, which fills me with joy because when you're starting something new, you can always feel a little bit like, is it going to work? Is this a risk I should be taking? Should I just leave things as they are? And it's always good to see that a risk has paid off because you are enjoying the episodes and I'm really enjoying recording them. And if this is your first Coffee Break episode, then let me explain. Coffee Break is a brand new segment of the Conversation podcast, which will officially launch in September with season 4 of the podcast. Now, coffee breaks are much shorter episodes, generally about 20 to 30 minutes, but sometimes we do go a little bit over. And in our Coffee Break episodes, I talk to the author only about their brand new book. And this is my 5th Coffee Break episode. Previous Coffee Breaks have featured S.A. Cosby, Rod Reynolds, Lola J, and Helen Monks Takar. And in today's Coffee Break, I'm taking a break with best-selling and award-winning author Kia Abdullah. Kia Abdullah's previous books include Take It Back, Truth Be Told, Next of Kin, and Those People Next Door. And her new book, which is out today, so happy publication day, Kia, is What Happens in the Dark. Now, normally I would say, sit back or go for a walk. But instead, grab a cup of coffee or tea and enjoy your break. Kia Abdullah, welcome to the Conversation Coffee Break.
Thank you for having me, Nadine.
You are very welcome. I'm glad you are here. Right. My first question for you, Kia, is can you tell the listeners about your book, What Happens in the Dark? And I'm holding up the proof copy because...
Oh, perfect. So this is the finished copy, What Happens in the Dark. Look at this foil.
It's
yes,
so
of course. So What Happens in the Dark is book 5. In it, we meet Safa Salim, who is a journalist that used to work at the UK's most respected newspaper. But following a fall from grace, she's ended up at a local rag in East London. And there she is called into her editor's office one day and asked to look into Lily Astor, who happens to be a famous breakfast TV presenter, who appeared on screen that morning with bruises on her body. And Safa and Lily happened to be childhood best friends, but they lost touch. So Safa tries to get back in touch and find out what happened. Lily insists that the bruises were innocent, and initially Safa believes her, so decides to kind of leave it alone. But then a few days later, the police are called to Lily's home, and although she appears quite calm, a dead body is lying at her feet. And Safa begins her own investigation into what happened, but let's just say she is not prepared for what she will uncover.
Right, I've read it and I think it's amazing. Also, I think all of Kia's books are amazing because every time every time I read one of yours, I'm like, oh my God, she's so good. She is so good.
Thank you.
So this is a question I had, which is not on our official list, but how do you think you've grown as a writer since your debut, Take It Back, was published?
I think I'm more confident in my ability. So although the writing doesn't necessarily get any easier, I remember David Nichol, the author of the mega seller One Day, saying it never gets easier. And I remember reading that going, God, really? And I think that's true, but I'm confident that I can get to the end. So I know it's going to take a lot of work. And there are, of course, days where I'm like, why the hell am I doing this? You know, there are easier ways to earn money. And I love books, so I could just be a bookseller. I could go and get a part-time job in Waterstones and still be in publishing that way. But now I have the confidence to know that I can get through all of that, the difficult period. I can get through the weeds and I can get to the end. And so that as a writer is really helpful to know that I now have the tools in my toolbox to get to the end without having a breakdown.
What does keep you going though? Like, what methods do you think you've got in place now to help push through? Because those days are hard when you just think, why
Yeah,
am I doing
those
this?
days are hard. I think, and this is still really difficult for me. I think knowing when to just step back from your desk and not throw good hours after bad, because sometimes you're like, I haven't hit my word count. I've got to brute force my way to the end. I've got to just sit here until I get it done. And there are days where I do just sit there and I do get it done, and the writing is terrible, but I know I've hit my word count. But there are days where, it's 5 p.m. and I'm like, me sitting at my desk for another 4 hours is not going to get me anywhere. So don't throw good hours after bad. And so it's knowing when to step away. I think just getting out of the house really helps. And this is why I found book form. We can talk about that a bit more, but so hard because during the pandemic, there was just nowhere to go, no one to talk to, nothing to do. And so for me, just being out in the world is really energizing. So whether it's, going for a walk, I box a lot. So I go boxing 3 times a week. That really helps energize me. So just doing something physical, because obviously what we do is so cerebral, just getting yourself away from your desk can help. And so, I think that's really important.
I was talking to, who was I talking to? S.A. Cosby, not for this, a while ago, and we were just talking about how much time we spend at our desk.
To be like S.A. Cosby is your friend and you call him Sean, unlike the rest of us, which is so cool.
He is my friend. I was talking to Sean.
I aspire to call S.A. Cosby Sean one day.
It's cool having famous friends, but no, but what I was saying is that we were talking about the amount of time that we spend at our desk and I suppose writing full time, and he was just basically saying that it is a job and you wouldn't want to spend 24/7 at your desk at your job. So like your weekend, you need to be precious of your weekends, like look after them. You wouldn't want to spend
remember that even though it was a passion, it is a job now. And with that comes danger. When you do turn your passion into a job, it sometimes does feel like work. And that's because it is work. And coming back to boxing, I was like, oh God, what if I put on a show? What if I get involved in promoting? And I have to take a step back and think, it's okay to just have hobbies without turning them into side hustles. And so, he's absolutely right. It is a job and it's okay to feel fed up with it sometimes.
Yeah. I wrote a Substack about that. I can't remember when it was, sometime earlier in the year, because me and my best friend were talking about when your hobby becomes your job. Because I was saying I don't have a hobby, and she's like, "Oh no, but you're right." And I'm like, "No, that's my job now.
That's my job. Yeah.
Yeah, I need something else other than outside of this. So I think it's important to have something outside of our writing, outside of our books. So Kia, what came to you first? Was it the character, a specific scene, the overall premise, or something completely different?
I think the theme came to me first. I wanted to write something about violence against women and girls. We've had years of the Me Too conversation, and although I think it has changed things a little bit, I don't think the results have been as wide-ranging as we'd like. And for example, last year we had the whole choose the bear conversation. And for listeners and viewers who aren't familiar, the question was, if you're isolated in a forest somewhere, would you rather be alone with a man or a bear? And huge swathes of women were choosing the bear. And to be honest, I still don't know my answer to that question, but I just thought it was such an interesting conversation and I wanted to explore it more deeply. And I also wanted to play with the idea of the perfect victim and how speaking out about violence exposes you to these impossible standards. It's like, if you acted like a bitch that one time and somebody captured it in public, can you really be believed? And so I wanted to look into that as well. So the theme came first, and then Safa, the main character, and Lily came after. And I really love Safa as a character. I think, she's probably my favorite character that I've ever written. So I really hope that readers love her as much as I do.
Were you excited to meet her on the page? When you finish a chapter and then maybe you haven't seen her in that chapter, but she's coming back in the next chapter. Were you excited to meet her?
Yeah, and I have a lot of affection for her. Sometimes what I often do with my characters is, make them super tough, and then I have to add kind of vulnerability to them. Whereas Safa, she kind of came to me really fully formed. And so, I really can't wait for readers to meet her and see what they think.
I always find it interesting, when people, when I say us as writers or as creatives, say the character came to us fully formed. And I think sometimes, I don't know if readers understand exactly what we mean by that, because sometimes you can have a writer, you can have a character, but it takes a lot of work getting to know them and working out what their motivations are and, what they like, what they don't like in their relationships, all these different things. But then sometimes they just appear on the page and they are exactly who they are. And
Who they are,
you don't have to mine for information from them.
I mean, it's interesting because with her, I did this thing, I can't remember the 5 situations, but for me to kind of help flesh her out, I had these 5 situations. Like one of them was, if someone jumps the queue, what would that, what would the character say, or what would the character do? Would they just allow them to? Would they confront them? Would they be rude? And there were 5 scenarios. And I just instinctively knew how she would be and how she would react in all 5 scenarios. And so that was just really nice to know on a very kind of deep level who she was, how she would react, how she interacts with the characters around her and her relationships. And so, as a writer, that's kind of what you want. Although, there can be pleasure in working out who somebody is as well. But I love that she kind of came to me as a person that I almost kind of knew in real life.
Okay, so as we're talking about characters, which character surprised you the most whilst writing?
See, that's a really good question, because it really closely relates to what I was just saying. So there's a character called Oliver Witherow in the book, and he's a bit of a posh boy character, and he's part of the reason why Safa has ended up at this local rag in East London. And initially, he is a bit of a hate figure for the reader, but I kind of found myself feeling a bit of affection towards him. He's quite funny, he's quite biting. It's the sort of humor that I like. And he's actually going to be back in the next novel. And
is he?
Yeah, and I give him a little bit more depth than what I initially planned him to have. And so I think he surprised me when in the course of writing this book and the next one.
I liked him. Every time he came on the page, I kept thinking, you can't handle the real world. There's no way you can handle it.
So I think, he will split readers. I know somebody else said, I can't wait for him to get his comeuppance. And I think some people would like him and would like spending time with him because he just has that level of humor that I quite like.
But you need that, don't you? And I think this is what I've learned through writing my own book. Sometimes you need to have that balance. And sometimes the original intention you had for a character, you don't maintain that throughout the book. Sometimes it changes.
No, and I'm really jealous of, I'm not a funny writer. I don't have comic timing. I struggle with that. So my books don't have, many moments of kind of levity, but I'm really jealous of crime authors who can kind of tackle really light and dark subjects, but that have those moments of lightness and comedy. I really envy that. That's not what you get from my books, but I love that as a reader when there are just these moments of lightness to contrast the dark.
What else do you envy as a writer, in a good way? Because I think you can have envy in a good way, not like, oh my God.
Envy. Like the purest is just the writing. Like sometimes you'll read a turn of phrase. And I recently read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and obviously she writes in a very different genre, but just some of the writing and the way she describes characters. I remember this line, she said, being a child or being a kid is a terrible thing, in charge of nothing. And I thought, that's just such a gorgeous, beautiful way to describe childhood. And so sometimes I'll just come across a turn of phrase and think, not in a million years at my desk would I have come up with that metaphor or that way to describe somebody. And so, it's just the writing, which I guess is like the simplest, most basic answer. But yeah.
Have you surprised yourself when you're writing, whether it's like a chapter, a scene, and you're just like, wow, this is good?
Sometimes I write, like one of the kind of, I suppose, monologues from Take It Back, readers still quote back at me. And it's Zara, who's the main character, and her backstory is, she comes from a very conservative Muslim family. And finally, she has this conversation with her mother where she says, oppression doesn't spread through men with guns or bombs on trains. It spreads through when women like you, with love and with all the affection in the world, tell their daughters not to dress a certain way or behave a certain way. And when I wrote that monologue, I thought, God, that really captures well what I want to say to my mum. And the fact that so many Desi women have come to me and quoted that has showed me that it really resonated with them. And so I'm really proud of that kind of section and that speech that she gives to her mum.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the most random fact you now know because of this book?
Oh, you know what? My random fact is probably quite stark. In the course of researching this novel, I found out that British Bangladeshi women are 24% less likely to receive an epidural during childbirth. That's obviously quite niche, but I think it speaks to the way women of color are treated by the health system, by kind of figures of authority. And look, I don't know if that's because they're not able to advocate for themselves, if it's because they're thought to withstand pain better in the way Black women have it's a massive misconception for many, many years of thought to be able to do. But I thought that was quite stark. And there was another statistic as well. I think it was like young British Black girls are, I don't want to say the figure, I think it's something like 3 times more likely to be strip searched than the white counterparts. I don't know exactly, but it was something like that, which again was quite stark. And so, yeah, I'm sorry it's not a fun fact, Nadine.
No, no, it's not a fun fact. But the strip search figure, it always baffles me because I think when I look at these, I say judicial figures, things, come from Law and Order, I'm always looking at it from the viewpoint as a criminal lawyer, and I know what the rules are, and it's like I know what the rules are, I know what the criteria are. You can't just strip search someone just because you feel like it. There are steps you have to go through, and I always just find it baffling that we end up with these statistics that young Black girls was just saying 3 times more likely to be strip searched. Because I'm like, it's not easy to do that. You just can't do it because it's Tuesday. Like there are rules, and it blows my mind completely.
I know. Look, you'll know more about all of this than I will, but we talk about, do we live in a racist country? And then you hear things like that. And so I've just looked it up, actually. It is. Yeah, it says Safa came to learn that Black girls were 3 times more likely to undergo invasive strip searches by the Met Police. And so, yeah, and look, there's so much we can say about the sexualization or the adultification of young Black girls. And so there are all these conversations going on. And so that's kind of like a sub-theme in the novel as well, what privileges we afford to certain women versus others. And so, I come back to next time I'll think of a fun fact for you, Nadine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, with the next book.
Quite a dark place quite quickly.
With the next book, we'll do fun facts. Okay, so was this book harder or easier to write than your last one, and why?
God, it was so much easier. Those People Next Door, my 4th book, was so hard. It was probably the hardest book that I've written, partly because I wrote it in the deep pandemic. And I mentioned earlier, I am energized by being out in the world, by meeting people, talking to people, doing things. And so to write in a vacuum was really, really difficult. But secondly, I tried this wonderful thing that writers tell me about, which is pantsing, so not plotting. And I had a beginning and I had an end to the novel, but I didn't have a middle. And I thought, well, if Lisa Joel can do it and Ian Rankin can do it and they come up with amazing books, then maybe I can try and do it. And I can't do it. And so there were just days where I was like, how do I get to the end? Like, who does this? And I literally had like a flow chart with 4 different characters and 4 different actions, and just found myself in a bit of a quagmire. And so now I know, like, my technique is to plot. And so for this book, I went back to what I know, which is plot, plot, plot. And because of that, I found it a lot easier to write.
See, I find it so strange and so crazy that you did that, because I know you. And, and I say we work together in the sense of when we have like your consultations on different aspects of your book and stuff. So and you've sent me, I've seen your spreadsheets. So the fact that you're sitting here telling me that you pants the book, I'm like, that's not Kia. Why would you do that to yourself?
And bearing in mind, I only pantsed the middle bit, so I had the beginning and the end, but yeah, it's just not my style, it's not my style. And so I think it's good to experiment. Like with What Happens in the Dark, I've experimented with a bit of a subplot, which I've never done in my other novels. It's always been, one main plot, beginning to the end. And that was quite hard, but I enjoyed it. So I think you do need to push yourself as a writer. But when it comes to technique, if you know what your technique is and it works for you, then follow that.
Yeah, I know pantsing's not the way. It's not the way for me.
It's not the way for you.
No, God,
I
no.
think, it's because these writers that I admire say they just sit down and write. And I think, well, there's got to be something in it. But, there's something in it for them. There's nothing in it for me, is what I've discovered.
But then again, it's like you said, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with like, let me just try and see. Because these are the writers I admire. This is their technique. Let me see if that works for me. And you can try it and then you work out very well. I would have worked out very quickly. This definitely does not work.
Does not work
for me. Yeah. But I suppose it's also a good way of learning about yourself as a writer.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
All right. So Kia, without giving away any spoilers, did the book end the way you originally planned or did it surprise you too?
No, as I said, I'm a plotter, so I knew how it would end. There are occasions where certain things reveal themselves to me, and I think that can work really well. I think maybe it's Ian Rankin who said, if you don't know how the book will end, then the reader won't know how the book will end. And there's definitely merit in that. I remember with Next of Kin, my third book, there's a final twist that I didn't know, and it came to me as I was writing the scene. And it's always the one that, readers write to me. Just yesterday, I had somebody on Instagram say, I read Next of Kin 2 years ago, and I still think about the twist. And so not planning can definitely work well. But with most of my novels, the twist or the reveal is so intricately linked to everything that came before it. So I really need to know in order to kind of seed those clues and all the signals and the signs that readers can come back to and think, oh my God, yeah, it was there all along, because otherwise the payoff doesn't feel deserved and it doesn't hit quite the same. So for me, yes, I do need to know how it ends, and I do need to be, obviously you can come back and you can kind of crop dust, your novel with all those clues. But for me, because it is so intricately linked, it really helps me to know at the beginning how the book will end.
Because I suppose, I don't know, is it harder to go back? Because it's not even like you're unraveling, because you're having to go back and actually plant something new in and then make sure that everything then adds up and ties in.
Exactly, because it's harder. It's like a weave, isn't it? So if you can weave in all the clues and the color from the beginning. And if you don't, then you need to unthread parts of it, and it's just a lot more work. And so for me, I need to know how it ends. I think that's the best way for me.
I think I'm okay with like new, like I say, subplots like coming out of nowhere. I think I'm okay with that. But I think I need to, because I have an idea of how it ends. So even if like a character, I'm just saying if the killer might change, I might change who the killer is. But the way in which
that's interesting.
Yeah, but the way in which it ends still remains relatively the same. I don't think it changes that much.
So we're plotters for life, basically.
Oh yeah, I ain't doing. God, I couldn't put myself through it. I think I could pants it for 20,000 words, but I know after 20,000 words, I need a plan. Yeah. So I could pants Act 1, but after Act 2, I need a plan for Act 2 and 3, because otherwise there'll just be no books. So Kia, did you ever hit the wall when writing this book, and how did you get past it?
I mean, compared to Those People Next Door, like I said, it was a breeze, but I think the hardest part was probably the first round of edits. Full disclosure, Nadine and I share the same editor, Manpreet Garaval, who is brilliant, by the way. I mean, she takes a novel and she knows exactly exactly what needs work.
Yeah.
And so I think with What Happens in the Dark, I felt like I had a really great story, but she saw that it needed more, more emotion, more detail, and she knew where it needed those things. But of course, talking about unweaving a story, it's a bit like a house of cards, isn't it? If you change one element, you can't just change it at the top. You need to undo bits of it and you need to go back to the bottom. And my technique is, if there are like 3 major things that need to be changed, you can't just tackle all of those 3 in the second edit. You need to do one piece by one piece. And so, for example, one of the things that Manpreet wanted me to change is have a bit more of Lily and Safa's childhood relationship in the novel, so maybe flashbacks or maybe memories, just cementing their relationship a bit more. So I couldn't do that at the same time as, say, working on the court scenes. And so I did like a whole edit of the book where my main focus was, okay, how am I developing Lily and Safa's relationship through the novel? Then the second run is, okay, how can I develop some of the court scenes? And so I think that first round of revisions was really hard, and there were days where I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But coming back to your first question, earlier question, how have I grown as a writer? I know I can do it. And so, just stop moaning and get on with it.
And when you look back to when you were going through that editing process with book 1, and you compare it to your editing process with what happens in the dark, I think that's when you can really see how you've grown and how you've changed as a writer, is how you respond to edits. Because my response to edits for The Jigsaw Man was like, oh my God, what is this? You want me to do what? How? You want a red herring? How am I supposed to put a red herring in? It was like panic.
Go to the fishmonger.
Yeah, exactly. I want to go to the fishmonger. But then with the latest book, it's like, okay, you need to do these things. It's a lot more measured, a lot more.
Yeah, I'm lucky in that I think I've always just had a very positive experience with editors, and maybe it comes from, so I used to work at Asian Woman magazine as a features editor, and I've been on both sides of the fence, where I was a very heavy-handed editor, and I think then I learned that actually it's not me editing a feature to be my voice, it's editing it to retain the voice but just polish it a bit more. And so through that I understood the role of an editor, and that they're trying to help you build the best work that you can. And and I think different editors work different ways. Like Manpreet will never change my work on a line-to-line basis. Like she'll never say, oh like change this word to that. Hers I feel like more developmental, more structural, drawing things out. Occasionally she might say like, oh, take this line out, but that's very, very rare. And so in terms of line edits, I don't get many kind of suggestions. It's more just making the work stronger, more emotional, more, hit harder. Where are the plot holes? And so she really kind of retools the novel in that way. And so I don't think I've been lucky enough that I don't think I've ever looked at her revision letter and been like, what the hell is this? Or felt resistant to it. And that's lucky. I'm just trying to think of an example. And I think even then, if I did have like a visceral reaction, I probably would follow the advice, which is, just put the letter away for 2 days, come back to it, and then you see that your editor is actually right. I've always had a very positive experience with editing my novels.
It's funny when you was talking about, editing yourself and like looking for the emotion. And I was it's only just occurred to me that as a lawyer, I've always had to do the opposite. I've always had to take the emotion out of it. So anything I write, whether it's an application to the court or whether I'm just putting together a brief to counsel or putting together my clients, the defendant's proof of evidence, so their statement, I'm taking all the emotion out because I'm just dealing with facts. And now I suppose that's probably done when I do get comments. It's what are they thinking?
More emotion.
It's like more emotion because I haven't been trained that way. I've been trained to just deal with the
really
facts.
Interesting, right? Yeah. Okay.
And it's only from talking to you, I'm just like, oh, I just had that aha moment.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting. So it's kind of 2 different ways of thinking almost, isn't it? Not just writing, but thinking.
Yeah. There's no emotion here. I just deal with you have no feelings. That's fact what I told the baby lawyers when I'm teaching them advocacy. I always say to them, you're robots. You have no feelings. You don't think. You don't believe. You just submit.
Not very helpful qualities in a novelist, unfortunately.
No, they're not. It's the complete opposite. You don't want that. You need feelings. You need to understand how how a character feels, and how they're going to respond. And this is a question I had because I was just thinking about Lily and Safa. Did you like Lily?
Oh God, that's a really interesting question. I kind of wanted her to be a little bit unlikable because coming back to this thing of a perfect victim. And so if a woman says that she's a victim, is the fact that she's unlikable less likely to make, for her to be believed? And so I think I had a lot of sympathy for her, but whether I liked her, I don't know. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what readers think.
I'll tell you what I think afterwards.
Okay, all right.
But the likability thing, it's tricky because like going back to being a lawyer, and I've had clients and they're not likable. They're just everything about them. Like you have a visual reaction to them. The minute they open their mouth, you don't like them. And I've done trials. I had a client charged with Section 18. So this is GBH, causing grievous bodily harm with intent. And he was not likable. And he gave evidence, and you just think, oh, you're just digging a hole for yourself. But the best way for me to deal with it was to address his lack of a personality and how unlikable he was. I just had to deal with that straight on with the jury. Right. And then say to them, your job's not to judge his likability. It's not about personality. It is about whether or not the prosecution have proved the case. But it does... It's something you have to consider.
And it informs so much of life. And, we talk about pretty privilege, but there's kind of charm privilege or charisma privilege as well, isn't there? If you can walk into a room and make yourself likable, people immediately think you're smarter. People immediately think you're a good person. And you get all of these, the halo effect as well. So I'm sure you've also done the opposite, defended people who may have been guilty, but their charisma has worked in their favor.
Oh my God, you've seen them charm. They sit in the witness box and they just charm everyone in the room. And you're like, and I'm sitting there thinking, there's no way. You might be thinking you're a terrible person, but they have that ability to charm and I suppose to manipulate. The courtroom's an interesting place to be, to see personalities, I always say.
And although, it trains some of the emotion out of you, there's a lot of material as well to kind of cherry pick for your novels as well, I bet. Yeah,
it's all there. It's a great big supermarket. So Kia, what are you working on next?
I'm working on book 6. So Safa Salim will be back. All my early readers from What Happens in the Dark have already started messaging me going, is there going to be a sequel? Will we see Safa again? And so, yes, she will be back in book 6, yet untitled, but she'll be working on a case that will be familiar to readers who've read What Happens in the Dark. And, I'm kind of flirting with the idea of making her a series character. And I mean, better than most, I think writing a series has different challenges. And so I don't know if I want to grapple with those challenges, but I do love her as a character. And I think she has series potential.
Can I ask you, this is without giving away spoilers or anything, were there any times when you was writing this book that you thought, let me just leave the subplot alone? Let me just completely forget about it?
As in take it out completely?
Yeah.
I mean, I did, because I think it complicates things, and B, initially I'm not sure there's this wisdom that if you can take a subplot out of a novel and you still have a fully formed novel, then maybe you should just take it out. And it certainly would have made my life easier, but I found the subplot really, really interesting, and it played into the themes about how different women are treated, how there's a difference between, if you're a privileged white woman like Lily versus if you're, come from a very disadvantaged background, if you can't speak English, for example, how, coming back to this epidural fact that I learned, how are women who maybe can't speak English or can't advocate for themselves as strongly treated by bodies of authority. And so that kind of fed into the theme as well, and it just gave me more fertile ground to explore in the novel. And so in the end, I wanted to keep it. I did have a conversation with my editor. I said, what do you think about this? Should we take it out? And she thought about it, and I think if she thought it was going to be a better book without it, she would have no qualms about saying, get rid of this extra 20,000 words. But she was like, no, actually, I think it does enrich the novel as long as we can integrate it into the main plot, which I think we've done. And so, yeah, I think it makes it a richer novel for staying in.
Does it matter? I know we're talking around it, so the listeners will just have to buy the book and read it, and then I'll work out what we're talking about. But we are talking around it. But do you think, like, writing it, having that subplot, did it make you think of yourself differently as a writer? Because I think sometimes one of my words for the year has been like being brave as a writer and like taking on different subjects or taking on different genres. Did it make you think, actually, there's more I can do as a writer?
Yeah, I think it did challenge me. And I think with books 1 to 4, it was, there was a court case in the middle. And so, there's a crime, there's a court case, and there's a resolution. Whereas this book is slightly different. I mean, it does still follow that template, but it had this other thread running through it. And so I think, it proved to me that I can tackle something different. And when those first revisions came back, it was really about making sure that I can integrate those two plots into a cohesive whole. And there were days where I thought, can I do this? As you say, is it easier to just rip it out and put it in the bin? It will make my life a lot easier. But having done it, I know that I've grown in confidence, and talking about this toolbox, added another tool in my toolbox, and knowing that I can hit a wall, I can have doubt, I can have lack of confidence, but then I can get to the end and, have a book that I'm proud of as well.
Okay, so what message or feeling do you hope readers take away from what happens in the dark?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, firstly, I hope that they love Safa as much as I do. But I also want them to reflect on some of the themes in the book. There's a part where, Safa reflects on that question we've all heard, like, why didn't she say anything at the time? And she notes how there's a line, she says how speak at your weakest or hold your tongue seems to be the prevailing message. And how many times, have we been complicit in that conversation? Have we said, well, why did she stay with him for that long? If they weren't happy, or why is she smiling in these pictures, or why did she wait so long to say something? So I want readers to kind of think about times where they may have thought the same thing. And one thing I always hope with my books is you finish the last page and you immediately want to talk to somebody about it. And so if that's what they're left with, then I feel like I've done my job as a novelist.
I think I normally just message you like, hi, Kia. What did you do?
I mean, what was nice is another mutual friend of ours, Louise Hare, read the book and she was like, I've got this sussed, I've got this time, Kia's not going to get me this time. She's not going to get me. And then she messaged me and she was like, you effing got me. And I was like, sorry,
don't you feel satisfied though when you get those messages?
Yeah,
you hear from us and you're like, Kia. You're like, yes.
It's very satisfying. Yeah.
Okay, Kia, finally, to end our coffee break, which book, film, show or video game do you recommend?
Do I'm going to be really unoriginal and say the book that I mentioned earlier, which is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And I say I'm being unoriginal because it won the Pulitzer Prize, it won the Women's Prize for Fiction, so it's no secret that it's an amazing book. But I just absolutely loved it. I think Demon is probably my favorite character ever. I mean, up until now, it's been Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables, like this old.
Oh my God! Look at that!
Look at this battered old copy.
Did you used to watch the series?
I didn't know. You know why? I'm just resistant to it in case I don't love Anne.
But you'd love her.
You think? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a shot then, because do you know what? For ages, I didn't reread this book because I just thought, oh God, what if I'm not as fond of her as I was when I was younger? But I reread it a couple of years ago for a piece that I was writing for the FT, and I just, still absolutely loved her. But she had stiff competition from Demon. I just fell in love with the character, and she's an extraordinary writer. So if you haven't read Demon Copperhead, definitely add it to your list.
Okay, well, that just leaves me, Kia Abdullah, to say thank you so much for joining me for the Conversation Coffee Break.
Thank you, Nadine. It's been a pleasure as ever.
And that's it for this coffee break. Thank you so much for joining me. Starting from season 4, we'll be bringing you regular coffee breaks. 30-minute episodes perfect for a quick chat with your favourite authors about their latest books. And here's the fun part. Next season, we are answering your questions. If there's something you've always wanted to ask an author, send it in. Email your question to theconversation@nadinematthieson.com and we might just answer it in a future episode with a special shout out to you, of course. Until next time, keep reading, keep listening, and I'll see you soon for another coffee break. Oh, and before I forget, don't forget to subscribe, follow, like, review, and share this episode with your friends. Your support keeps the podcast growing, and if you head down to the show notes, you can also support the podcast by buying us a cup of coffee. The links are in the show notes.